Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so this is going to be my third video today, sort of in the wake of the Horizon 2059 cockpit attempted sabotage incident. Okay, and basically in this video, I want to take a very closer look at just a much deeper look at sort of like how we might address the mental health issue that we have in aviation today. And granted, I'm not very hopeful. Okay, and the reason I'm not hopeful is because I think the airlines are so sensitive about anything that could just how delicate the industry is, and how just very delicate things in public eye could affect could affect their profits basically. Because I mean, just the slightest doubt in the public that there's mental health issues in aviation, that's going to really threaten airlines. And also the airline industry is so heavily unionized. Okay, pilots are so heavily protected by unions that I think it's going to be really hard to have any realistic to realistically address these issues. And already there are issues. I mean, a lot of pilots that end up getting caught with alcohol, or like say residual blood alcohol, some of them keep their jobs and they just end up going. A lot of pilots end up going to rehab, and they end up coming back, basically, being supervised through rehab and maybe getting their medical checks more frequently, and having restrictions put on their medical certificate. Sorry about the dogs there. Anyway, they're not my dogs, by the way. Anyway, but basically, just to take a careful look at what, even if it's not hopeful. Okay, I'm not actually hopeful. I actually think that airlines, and I think pilots unions are going to tend to kind of let this get suppressed and sort of let this get forgotten as soon as possible, because I think it's just too much of a threat to both pilot unions and to airlines. But we're allowed to daydream, and I think we should daydream out loud. What would it look like, let's say, for a situation to be? How could we possibly address mental health in aviation in a better way? Okay, because it is a serious issue. And again, as I've said in the prior videos, I think we need to include in mental health, not just whether a person has maybe undiagnosed depression or undiagnosed maybe psychosis or whatever. Now, there's not much you can do about sudden onset mental illness. Okay, that's just something we all live with. Anybody can have an aneurysm or a heart attack at any moment, and unfortunately, we all live with that risk. But there may be some stress factors that sort of lead up to those things. Okay, so not just depression, psychosis, bipolar, but also stress. Stress management and substance abuse. Obviously, substance abuse is a big one. But also, I want to include marginal pilot skill. Okay, being under maybe more supervision, taking extra IOE time, maybe having difficulty with check rides. I think that needs to be included, as well as people that may just not have full sharpness with their situational awareness. And lately I've seen a lot of issues happening where we're getting a lot of loss of separation and a lot of kind of mistakes being made in terms of like people on go arounds maybe, or people on go-arounds maybe being cleared to cross another active runway, and not just having extra awareness that maybe another aircraft is is taking off on that runway, or maybe thinking you got cleared, and maybe hearing maybe the clearance for another aircraft and having like weird almost loss of separation issues, and being cleared to, like, say, take off or line up and wait while another aircraft is on short final and maybe taking too long to get going and causing all these little things. I mean, some of this stuff is kind of the everyday of commercial aviation, and these things will happen from time to time. But occasionally, I think some percentage of these loss of separation are just weird miscommunications and problems with, let's say, separation issues, basically, on runways and around runways. I think some of that can be explained by people who just automatically, an automatic pilot, just sort of sleepwalking, just sort of, they get a clearance and they just accept the clearance. Having just a little more awareness. You don't always have to accept a clearance, okay? And just that to me is situational awareness, okay, and being sharp. So I would include in mental health pilots that are kind of marginal in skill, pilots that are maybe having lapses in situational awareness. And of course, well, I wanted to add some of the hot mic incidents from Southwest, but let's just stick with basic, like, say, pilot skill, or let's say people who are having issues with the company. I want to go back to the Auburn Callaway incident. This is the FedEx attempted murder suicide. This guy wanted to commit suicide. Okay, he was going to lose his job with FedEx. Okay, this was Auburn Callaway. This was 1994, April 7th, 1994. It was a DC-10. That was back when the FedEx had real DC-10s with flight engineers. And apparently there was a lot of warning signs about this guy. Like, in other words, if we're gonna think of a way to deal with mental health in aviation, okay, we need to be aware that, a lot of times, well in advance of these incidents, like the German wings, okay, this guy Andreas Lubitz with German wings, there were a lot of warning signs with Andreas Lubitz well in advance of what happened to him. Okay, he may have been trying to conceal some of the problems he had with his eyesight or whatever, but he had issues going way back even to flight training. Okay, likewise with Auburn Callaway FedEx 705, he had a bad reputation. Okay, and people knew about him. All right, and the situation with Auburn Callaway was that he kind of slipped into FedEx right about the time of the Flying Tigers merger. All right. And apparently, as I understand it, I could be wrong, but I read some of the old reports, the old press reports and stuff. And apparently, Auburn Callaway didn't make it through his probation with Flying Tigers. Okay, but apparently, just as he was having trouble with his probation at Flying Tigers, that was right when they did the merger with FedEx, and somehow he was able to slip into FedEx, even though he really wasn't going to get kept by Flying Tigers. Okay, and I think that some really smart, some management pilot, or chief pilot, or some manager, I guess, from Flying Tigers, was sharp enough to let FedEx know that he had these issues. And so FedEx inherited the problems, I think, with what we know. One of the things we know is that maybe possible falsification of his record, his flying record, or his flying time from the U.S. Navy. Okay, we know that Auburn Callaway was a U.S. Navy pilot, but apparently there was some issue of falsifying his actual experience. Okay, there may have been more issues. I leave it open that Flying Tigers maybe had other reasons for not wanting to keep him. Okay, so I don't know that we really will know the full story, but at the very least, there was issues of falsifying his records. But I think he was probably a problem employee. My understanding, just looking back in the records that I've seen, he had issues of showing up late, showing up dressed inappropriately, just signs of mental instability, I think, or at least being insecure in that environment, not being well adapted to that environment. Okay, and so I think that, in all honesty, if we could really go back and see the problems he had with Flying Tigers and really look at as to why they didn't want to keep him, okay, it may have been more than just falsifying his Navy records. He may have had some real issues. Okay, but it just goes to show that whenever you have people that are kind of marginal in skill or marginal in terms of fitting in or whatever, a lot of times in the highly unionized and the highly the company also wants to create kind of a, they don't want to be too hostile against their pilots, But I think in this idea of trying to give everybody, the best chance possible, maybe give them extra IOE time, and just try to be really accommodating, I think we need to be careful, because a lot of times we may be sort of allowing, what is effectively mental issues to get into the cockpit. And I think that's exactly what happened with FedEx 647, okay, which involved a very marginal pilot who was having personal issues in her life. Okay, and that actually, the actual final result was a bad landing. But if you look at the whole chain of events, you're talking about someone who really doesn't have full command and proficiency, or I would say it's more than proficiency. I would say it's basic skill, and basic just situational awareness, and just the full sharpness to be a pilot. And I think that is also mental. That's also a mental health issue. Okay, whether you really have that edge. And then also the Atlas 3591, just overreacting to something unexpected while your IMC accidentally accidentally hitting the toga switches, and just having a complete disorientation as to the plane doing weird things. And the same thing with the United 1722. A guy who had a lot of experience in 777s, but had been a long time in Airbuses, and then coming back, just kind of not really in a comfort zone. And when things were going wrong, just tiny bit behind, and just kind of a little bit disoriented at having sort of something unexpected happen with the speed tape, because there was confusion about the flap setting. But I think somebody who's sharper kind of would have anticipated and sort of been ready for anything to go wrong when any flight control is being put in transition. You know what I mean? So so I look at all those things as being kind of mental health. And, in that sense, you can sort of see the Auburn Callaway. If you take away the actual hijacking incident of Auburn Callaway, where he actually pulls out the hatchets or the spear or whatever he did, basically trying to kill the flight crew. If you kind of look back at the sort of the chronic issues he was having at Flying Tigers, okay, kind of fitting in, adapting, maybe even his abilities on check rides, he was only a flight engineer, so I don't know how hard his check rides could have been, but basically just issues of fitting into the company. I think we can start to include in our mental health, sort of in the spotlight, and how we look out for mental health issues having to do with like marginal performance, maybe marginal fitting into the company expectations, company rules, fitting into the company. And just kind of looking out for people who show those warning signs, and not to look at these people in a judgmental way. It's not that. It's just that flying. I think we just need to change. Sorry, we just need to change our attitude, and maybe take away some of the optimism we have, where we just inherently we look at flying as being inherently a very safe, very safe thing, and we're more concerned about the security of pilots in terms of their career, because it's so expensive to fly, and people come out of their flight, they end up spending a fortune on flight training, that we end up being more concerned about the well-being of pilots in terms of their career, as opposed to being concerned primarily about how dangerous it is to fly airplanes. I'm sorry, but I mean, you get into something like aviation, you're getting into a profession that's inherently dangerous. I'm sorry, dangerous is the word, right? And I just disagree with people that don't see flying as inherently dangerous. I coming from flying myself, even though I never got to be an ATP, but I did have some experience as a professional pilot and as a flight instructor. And I think that it's probably better philosophically to look at flying as inherently dangerous. Okay, really dangerous, and you really need to have an edge. And it's not good enough just to be mediocre, acceptable, average. I'm sort of on top of it. I've sort of got good, acceptable situational awareness. I think, to be quite honest, when things go really wrong, they tend to go wrong kind of in little tiny ways, and like little problems add to more problems. And when you really when let's say when lives are really on the line, like say with this United 1722, it's something so simple. It was just skipping a flap setting, but the first officer understood it as just one flap setting without skipping. So in other words, he set the flaps to a position that wasn't what the captain expected. And the captain had just the slightest lapse of just not feeling a little disoriented with not seeing what he expected on the speed tape after the flap was changed, And so I think that somebody who is a little sharper and just has that little extra sense of being a pilot, all right, whenever there's a transition of any flight control, like say the flaps or the gear or whatever, just to kind of almost expect something to be abnormal when there's a transition, and whenever just be ready to see something different, and not just fall into that hypnosis where you just expect everything to be perfect. I think exactly when you're transitioning, or even like say with trim, when you're doing trim and anything abnormal, just being ready to sense something abnormal. You know what I'm saying? Just that's the difference between somebody who's passive and a little bit behind the airplane and somebody who's sharp and just kind of really on top, And for some people, it's natural to be on top, and for other people, they have to really almost try or think about it, or maybe they just get so task saturated, because apparently that United 1722, they were taking off in really bad weather. They had all kinds of other issues. But the bottom line is that, just like with the Atlas 3591, for whatever reason, if a person is just a tiny bit behind, as soon as things get a little bit funky, a little abnormal, things can sort of, it's almost like a domino effect, where little things add to other little things, and just the slightest bit of disorientation, just a little bit of overreaction, and suddenly you're unstable. And basically the United 1722 to me was very similar to the Atlas 3591, because the result of a pilot being just a little disoriented was that both aircraft got in very serious pitch down situations. And the United 1722, it wasn't so bad of a pitch down, but they were at a much lower altitude. Okay, so in the end, it was still, really critical recovery. And so I put United 1722 in the same category as Atlas 3591. Okay, so basically, I think that mental health should also include, the realities of pilots who are sort of marginal in terms of fitting into the company, or maybe in terms of actually, like say check rides, IOE, just kind of marginal, and just not having that sharpness of extra SA. Um, and so what can we do about it? All right. So that's the whole point of this video. Now I realize I'm just dreaming now, because, the realities of this have to do with either, like say the unions, or let's say the actual airlines themselves, and or how the airlines get along with the unions. Because in the end, this is going to threaten pilots. Right. And also maybe at some level, this could be political, but I think for now, I think it's going to be just an issue with airlines and unions. Okay. But basically the if I could just daydream, okay, I think first of all, we need to think of piloting, we need to think of aviation as inherently dangerous. All right. And I think we need to look at it as a situation where it's really just life threatening. It's a life threatening activity. Okay. And death, like massive death, is really in fingertips. Okay. So I think we need to look at it like surgery multiplied by 200, because it's not just the passengers you're carrying, it's potentially a midair with another airplane and other passengers, or maybe like an airport environment incident that could involve more than one aircraft, or maybe let's say crashing in a neighborhood and killing, innocent civilians. So I think we need to look at, first of all, we just need to change the mindset and not be afraid to look at flying as an inherently life-threatening, dangerous, very dangerous activity that requires an extra edge, so that this mental health standard cannot just be average mental health. Okay, it can't just be, oh, I'm not depressed, so I'm fine. You have to be a little better than just not being depressed. You have to be a little better than just not being psychotic. You have to really be sharp and really have, I think, a special, a demonstrated talent for flying, not just mediocre proficiency. Okay, I think we need to look at it as really having the extra edge, and it being more than just being just mediocre proficiency. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that mental health should be an automatic issue just by the fact that you're flying an airplane. Okay, just by the fact that you're in a situation that has abnormal amount of danger. Okay, an abnormal amount of stress, just inherently. Okay, even though you may be cool as a cucumber, you may be very cool by nature, you may be exceptionally mentally, very, very mentally fit, very mentally sharp, but just the fact that you're in a critical situation flying airplanes, because it's already a critical situation, I think mental health is already on the table for everybody. Okay, because having really good situational awareness is more than just being okay. It is extra critical. In other words, flying is critical. Okay, and so mental health is always on the table. So I think anybody who volunteers themselves to be working in an inherently dangerous and life-threatening field, okay, yeah, take it on. It should be great. It could be a great career, but I think you need to take it on in the sense that you accept, and you just accept that to be willing to participate in that profession, your mental health has to be on the table automatically. Okay. So I think that instead of putting like certain pilots on the spot more than others, I think all pilots should feel as though their mental health is on the table. Okay. And so what do I mean by that? If I could envision, I mean, this is just fantasy. You guys can criticize me, and maybe I'm wrong, but my fantasy is that just by accepting, being, an active airline pilot, okay, I think every airline pilot, all of them collectively, should be treated as though their mental health is on the table. Okay. And what that means is that just like if you belong to, like, say, a 12-step recovery group, like Alcoholics Anonymous, okay, I think every pilot should have a sponsor. Okay, a more senior, more experienced pilot who is qualified with extra training in mental health, and not just standard psychology, but the heightened psychology required to actually be a safe pilot, meaning the expectation that the mental health that should be brought into the cockpit should be well above average. Okay, and so I think there should be sponsors. Okay, people that are like senior, experienced pilots who have extra training in the heightened level of psychological sharpness and fitness required to be a competent, safe pilot. Okay. And I think every pilot should have a sponsor. Okay. And I think that, I think that part of being fit, just part of the job should be having regular check-ins and regular just communications. And it can be done in a very friendly way, but basically just, especially people who are a little bit marginal in their skill, you know? And so, if we're going to end up accepting people like Conrad Aska, that the guy that crashed the Alaska 3591, if we're actually going to keep people like that who have marginal check rides, who end up using extra time in their IOE and stuff like that, okay, fine. But they need to have a sponsor, and they need to be under a program where they just accept that they're going to have a lot more follow up and maybe more simulator, more frequent simulator, if not check rides, at least simulator, sessions, basically, and maybe a closer relationship with their sponsor. You know what I mean? Like a sponsor, and in a way that's not really unfair, because when I've seen these documentaries about, like I said, the SR-71 pilots, right? Just by volunteering to be an SR-71 pilot, those guys just volunteered that they were all going to be heavily supervised by each other. Okay, heavily supervised by each other, and they would have a ton of simulator practice, a ton. I mean, really just a ton. And I think they actually had sponsors, if I'm not mistaken, or at least there's some area in the Air Force where in some critical aspect of, in some critical jobs, you would actually have a sponsor. And I'm not sure if it was in reconnaissance flying or some other, but I think it's been done in the military. And I think that in the civilian world, it can also be done, where every pilot has a sponsor, every pilot, but that if you happen to be, let's say, a little more marginal in your skill, or having any issues with transition or just anything, that it can be perfectly understandable and no threat to their profession, no threat to their job security, to be, let's say, just to be under, let's say, a prescription, let's say like a prescription, where for certain pilots, they're going to have much more simulator sessions and much more close follow-up with their sponsor, to really maybe sharpen some pilot skills, or maybe just whatever, just situational awareness. Maybe somebody could be an excellent pilot, but their situational awareness needs a lot of work. Okay. And then honestly, if people end up having just like chronic issues, okay, to maybe have a transition program in the airline where they can be transitioned into another respectable field in the airline, like say maybe transition them into working dispatch, but where there's no shame in it and where they can preserve their job security, And then as far as like, well, okay, but if we're going to, like, say, tighten up the standards for mental health, then that's going to chop a percentage of the new pilots coming up. So, what can we do? And, I don't have an easy answer for that. Right. But I think that maybe one solution could be that maybe there could be maybe public and private funding, okay, that could fund something similar to like military pilot training, but on the civilian side, okay, where there could be, like, say, $200,000 scholarships, right, to try to recruit people who maybe don't think they want to be pilots, or maybe don't think they can afford to be pilots, right, but who demonstrate exceptional mental sharpness, let's say in sports or in other professions. Okay, so let's say maybe the cream of the crop truck drivers, or let's say cream of the crop people that are like, that do, like, say, motocross or like motorcycle, or whatever, just in some kind of scouting program to locate people from different professions, maybe like even nurses, or people that work, like, say, or I'm sorry, like paramedics, like ambulance drivers, people who are in inherently kind of critical jobs. Or even, like, say, really exceptional people who are, like, say, work search and rescue, like, say, in the Coast Guard, or let's say different branches of the military, people who show exceptional intelligence, exceptional sharpness, and just kind of have like a recruiting program where those people could get into, like, say, some kind of civilian training that's under, like, say, a scholarship, right? And then maybe also the flight schools that are associated maybe could try to save a lot of money with these new ultralight aircraft. Like, they have these new powered gliders that are very fuel efficient. All right. And maybe also, I think the FAA, to try to make it cheaper, because money's the problem. If you're going to have like a program, like a public program to try to recruit really talented people into aviation, right, you're still going to want to keep the spending down because it's very expensive. Okay, so I really believe that maybe for the future, to make flight training cheaper, just to capture more people, because the more people you capture for flight training, the more you can sort of weed out the people that don't have the extra mental health, right? And so you need to get more people coming into aviation, but that's the barrier, is the money, right? So even if you're going to have scholarship programs, and I think we should develop scholarship programs to capture more young people, right? But the more young people coming in, the more you can afford to weed out, let's say, the ones that don't have that extra. Okay, and also if we could develop scholarship programs, we might be able to recruit people who have that extra mental health that we're looking for, not just people who want to be pilots, because a lot of people dream of being pilots, but sadly they may not have that extra mental health, right? So we may need to recruit exceptional people from the Coast Guard, maybe from paramedics, ambulance drivers, maybe exceptional truck drivers, people that just have those motor skills, or even like artists, maybe exceptional musicians, people who show exceptional skill, like say military musicians. You never know when someone's going to have that fine motor skill, and that extra situational awareness that they can make excellent pilots. You never know. And so I think there ought to be a way to capture people who don't even realize they want to be pilots, and maybe set up very, very inexpensive training programs, under scholarship, okay, to try to just get a lot more people coming in, and where the economic barrier is a lot lower, so you could get more people coming in, so you have more opportunity to weed out more people, right? And I think one of the ways to make this more affordable is now they have power gliders, right? And different types of gliders, like sailplanes. I think that some of the skills that I noticed as a flight instructor, just the fine stability skills. Some people are just better at dampening oscillations. Oscillation dampening, I think that's something I never hear talked about in the flying community. But I just remember as a pilot, some people just naturally had just an uncanny sense of oscillation. Okay, micro oscillations, right? And those little tiny oscillations, people have almost like a millimeter sense of oscillation, and they're able to really dampen oscillation in flight, right? And I think that's something you see from people that I think are just natural on motorcycles, or just have an extra sense, of like playing pool, or just fine motor skills. But I guarantee you that if you can be sensitive to the tiniest instability in oscillations in flight, that I think translates as you get into more complex airplanes, and you get into situations where you get into little unusual disturbances, like we saw with the United 1722. And some people just have that extra fine motor skill, and they're just on top, and I think even in early training, you can develop a lot of those skills in gliders, right? And you can imagine like just changing the whole program of flight training, instead of just basic rough, like, oh, we're just going to make this approach at this airspeed and this power setting. You could have in gliders where you have pilots over and over again at different fine airspeeds, nailing different angles of attack, different airspeeds, different approaches under different profiles, almost like a test pilot, so that they can develop fine motor skills at establishing like different approaches under different airspeeds, different angles of attack. Like say, we're going to do this approach at 63 knots, or we're going to do this approach at 61 knots. We're going to do this approach at 59, and just almost getting to the micro level, And if you're flying gliders where you're not paying for all that avgas, you have more time to dedicate to really produce almost like what we now consider to be like a test pilot. But what you're really doing is you're developing people to have very fine motor skills to understand stability on another level. So you can really see how the round out and flare is different, even with just 2 knots different on the, on that final airspeed, and also checking descent rates. I remember flying, just looking back, we could have been much more focused on really controlling descent rate and speed and power setting. Just little things like that. But just the idea that you could make flight training you can make it much more comprehensive to make much better pilots if you could incorporate gliders, and also maybe have some way of recruiting maybe people that don't know they're interested in flying into these, like maybe publicly funded flight training, to try to capture more people to get a better pool, so we can afford to wash out more people. I hate to say it like that, but to to weed out more people. Anyway, just an idea, but anyway, thanks for watching, and appreciate your patience.